The shorthand is the butterfly effect. A butterfly can flap its wings and be king, and in Central Park you get rain instead of sunshine.
Although dinosaur fossils had been known for centuries, the word dinosaur itself wasn't coined until 1841 by the early paleontologist Richard Owen. A disclaimer here for the rest of the video is that when I say dinosaur, most of the time I mean non-avian dinosaur. Birds are dinosaurs, it'll be important later on, but for expediency's sake, I'll be dropping the non-avian most of the time. If you asked Owen, when he came up with the word, to describe a dinosaur to you, his description would probably look very little like how we imagine a dinosaur today. This is because paleontology is an ever-evolving field. As we gain better tools to use to study extinct animals and a broader base of previous knowledge to build upon, our understanding of extinct life grows. Let's use the Megalosaurus as an example. Among the first dinosaurs ever named, a really famous reconstruction of what the Megalosaurus might have looked like was revealed in Crystal Palace Park in 1854. This reconstruction was overseen by Owen himself. To be completely honest, the reconstruction is horrendous. We now know that Megalosaurus stood on two legs, unlike the quadrupedal animal depicted in the reconstruction, and also never had a large hump on its back. In fact, we even know why Owen included the hump on the model's back. It was inspired by his acquisition of a fossil with high vertebral spines in the 1840s, a fossil which we now know wasn't even from Megalosaurus. Let's have a look at another reconstruction of Megalosaurus from the late 19th century. Compared to our modern idea of what Megalosaurus looks like, it's still pretty off, but it's much more accurate than the Crystal Palace model, which predates it by only 40 years. The key takeaway that I want to stress here is that while we may never be able to truly know exactly what non-avian dinosaurs looked like, or how they behaved, as time goes on, we get a clearer and clearer picture. Paleontology isn't a static field, it's one that is constantly updating. In 1969, the field of paleontology was about to undergo a renaissance. For decades, people had argued back and forth on the link between dinosaurs and birds, and whether or not it existed. There was an idea floating around that dinosaurs were sort of an evolutionary dead end, that had failed to survive in any way into modern times. With this idea came a sense of stagnation in the field of paleontology. It didn't stop, but with dinosaurs being seen as having no modern descendants, there was less interest in the field than there may have otherwise been. This all changed with John Ostrom's discovery of Deinonychus antiropus in 1964. Ostrom looked at the skeletal structure of Deinonychus, a type of theropod dinosaur, and argued that its skeletal similarities to birds were too obvious to ignore. Other bird-like dinosaurs had been found before, such as Velociraptor, but it wasn't until Ostrom's discovery of Deinonychus that people began to accept that the link between birds and dinosaurs did exist. This period following Deinonychus' discovery, into the 1970s, is often known as the Dinosaur Renaissance. The newly recognised relationship between birds and dinosaurs led to an increase in scientific interest in studying these ancient animals. Figures like Robert Bakker and Jack Horner appear here, proposing new theories about the life strategies and behaviours of dinosaurs. Just like the research of the 19th century, not all the new theories were correct. Bakker, for example, argued that dinosaurs, like birds, were a warm-blooded animal, rather than cold-blooded, like reptiles. The currently accepted stance on whether dinosaurs were warm or cold-blooded is more nuanced, with it being believed that the answer changes depending on which dinosaur species in particular is being looked at. But those answers are still based on the theories that arose in the dinosaur renaissance of the 70s. Dinosaurs moving in herds, their child-rearing behaviours, it all comes from researchers whose work began in this renaissance. With the increased scientific interest in dinosaurs brought by the dinosaur renaissance came an increased public interest in them. Enter writer Michael Crichton, who, in 1983, began developing a screenplay, a route from which the entire Jurassic Park franchise would grow. The franchise is now the 60th highest grossing media franchise of all time, having pulled in just under $10 billion American dollars at the time of writing, placing it just under Demon Slayer and just over Angry Birds. With the newest movie in the series having just released, this position is likely to rise once again. Jurassic Park as a franchise is big money, and I don't think it's inaccurate to say that it has, more than maybe anything else on the planet, coloured the public perception of what a dinosaur is and how they behave. And to finally get to the point of this video, I have a problem with that. The dinosaurs in the franchise, especially as it goes on, are frequently inaccurate, and there's a general trend to portray them as monsters rather than as the animals they were. But before we can talk about the Jurassic Park movies, we'll have to go back to Crichton's 1983 screenplay I mentioned earlier, which he later transformed into a novel, and in 1990 published as Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is a pretty good book. I'm at a point in my life where I read 1 to 2 books a year, and if Jurassic Park is one of the only books I've read from cover to cover by the end of this year, I wouldn't consider that time wasted. It has its problems. The kid characters, especially Lex, have real issues with behaving like actual kids, which is frustrating given how much time we spend with them, and Ian Malcolm as a character has an unfortunate tendency to sound like a sort of condescending mouthpiece for Crichton's own takes, especially in the back half of the book. But I'm not trying to review the Jurassic Park book, I want to talk about the dinosaurs. Jurassic Park isn't really a book that's about the dinosaurs on a thematic level. On that level, it's a book about the dangers of unregulated scientific advances, especially those with a large profit motive behind them. You're so focused on whether or not you could that you forgot to think about whether or not you should, that kind of thing. It's a book about chaos theory and how all it takes is one little variable out of place, one tiny unexpected error for things to snowball and entire systems to produce unintended effects. Ultimately, it's a story about Murphy's Law. What can go wrong will, and we need to be able to prepare for that and take responsibility for when it does, especially when what's going wrong is something as capable of long-lasting damage as genetic engineering. In service of this theme, the science of the book tends to fall to the wayside. I'm not interested in dinging the novel for small paleontological mistakes. Oh, the dinosaurs don't have feathers. Well, it's impossible to know if this was really the child-rearing behaviour of this species, that kind of thing. But there are a lot of examples where something is wrong in the way that it really shouldn't be if basically any research has been done. Early in the book, when Procompsognathus are found to have escaped to the Costa Rican mainland, they are initially identified as potentially being a species of basilisk lizard, Basilicus amoratus, which is a species that doesn't exist. I think this illustrates a generally cavalier attitude towards scientific accuracy the book has. Crichton's attitude seems to be that if the reader can learn some new things about dinosaurs in nature, cool. But also, he isn't going to sweat the small stuff, so if that means some of what the viewer picks up from the book is wrong, so be it. Ironic,
considering the book's broader messaging
about chaos theory, but okay. The actual depiction of dinosaurs as animals is pretty satisfactory to me though, in at least that the dinos do act like animals 90% of the time, rather than like monsters. The park doesn't fail because dinosaurs are just such scary, malicious beasts, but for more pedestrian reasons.
like corporate espionage.
Hammond's decisions to not hire enough staff, not properly vet the staff he was hiring, and not properly compensating said staff, and just plain bad luck. The dinosaur threat is never world or society threatening, except for the danger that they may escape the island and become invasive species elsewhere. Instead, they're about as dangerous as any animal would be to a small group of people trapped on an island in a storm with no power or way to contact outside help. Mostly. Like I said, the dinosaurs, or the scientific accuracy of their depiction, isn't Crichton's main concern, so in some places, for the sake of generating more tension, to add more spice to the plot, he embellishes. I want to touch on a few examples here, with the dinosaur species whose embellishment pushes them the most towards monster territory. First, the Dilophosaurus, which Crichton invents wholesale as being able to spit venom, an ability given to the creature seemingly for the sole purpose of providing as gruesome a death as possible for Dennis Nedry, the guy responsible for much of what goes wrong at Jurassic Park. This feature really does make Dilophosaurus incredibly monstrous, but it's also quite a minor part of the book. They get foreshadowed during the tour, they engage in a bit of spit play with Newman from Seinfeld, and they peace out. Maybe I'd have more of a problem with it if it were a bigger part of the book, but as things stand, it's just a warning of things to come. Next up, T-Rex. There's nothing that stands out too much here. Yes, the Tyrannosaurus in the books are very dangerous, tossing cars, killing people, and starting stampedes of hadrosaurs, but given what we know about actual T-Rex, I'm happy to accept all of that as an accurate depiction of the animal. What I do want to briefly touch on here is the eyesight issue. Due to the impartial nature of the DNA the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park were cloned from, DNA from other species was used to fill the gaps. Some of this DNA is amphibian in origin, and because of that, the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park have amphibian-like vision, which is only capable of detecting movement. This applies to all of the animals in the park, but is shown most by T-Rex. On the one hand, the DNA from other species used to fill gaps gives Crichton an out. Anytime a species is inaccurate or behaves strangely, it's because it isn't an actual dinosaur clone. It's a weird Frankenstein's hybrid of 65 million year old amber DNA and whatever else they could get to bring it up to proof. On the other, there's a part of me that has to point out that the can only see movement rule mainly exists to increase tension in any T-Rex encounter scenes by giving it a classic movie monster rule that, if you follow, might just be your one chance of surviving an encounter with the dreaded beast. Like with the Dilophosaurus, it's a minor thing, but a sign of greater things to come. The amphibian DNA has other effects broader than the vision thing too, and with that, it's finally time to look at the book's quote-unquote velociraptors. Throughout the book, Alan Grant talks about his work at a dinosaur dig site in Montana and how he keeps unearthing both adult and juvenile velociraptors, dinosaurs he describes as being about 6 feet tall at the hip. Grant calls this species Velociraptor anteropus, a species that, like Basilicus amaratus, doesn't exist. When writing the book, Crichton wanted to include Deinonychus anteropus, the creature which kickstarted the dinosaur renaissance. However, he worried that Deinonychus wouldn't be a very dramatic name, so although throughout the book he's consistently describing Deinonychus anteropus, it's always called Velociraptor anteropus. This is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. When Crichton thinks something will make the story more exciting, he ignores accuracy and just makes stuff up. The issue expands when we get to the park and meet its head geneticist, Dr. John Wu. Wu introduces us to the park's velociraptors, which are very similar to the Velociraptor anteropus specimens Grant has been digging up in Montana, and identifies them as Velociraptor mongoliensis. Crichton has decided to pretend that Deinonychus was actually a velociraptor species, and to take things a step further, pretends all velociraptors are similar to his made-up Velociraptor anteropus. Imagine if this had happened with cats, and for the sake of recognizability, Crichton had renamed Panthera leo, the lion, to Felis leo, for the sake of making it more recognizable. Later on in the book, if you went on to describe Felis catus, the domestic cat, as being nearly identical to Felis leo, just because he had wrongly placed both in the same genus, I think most people would start calling bullshit. But people generally know less about dromaeosaurs than they do cats, so the wool is pulled over their eyes. So, the velociraptors are completely misrepresented, but it's not too huge an issue. As long as you know about it going in and are willing to sub in the word Deinonychus every time Crichton mentions velociraptor, it's basically fine. It's unfortunate then that this isn't the only issue with the velociraptors in the book. Back to the amphibian DNA. All animals created for Jurassic Park are female to prevent the chance of reproduction, and for extra safety, have their genitals irradiated before release into the park. Unfortunately, due to the fact that the dinosaurs were created using some non-dinosaur DNA, some of the species are actually capable of changing their sex in response to a lack of available mating partners. If it seems pretty shoddy that the geneticists at the park would add this to their dinosaur's genome without noticing, you're starting to get to the book's point about chaos theory and human error. So, they put chemicals in the DNA that turned the friggin' dinosaurs trans, and now the dinosaurs are breeding, especially the velociraptors. This is a big problem in the book, because the velociraptors are incredibly intelligent and vicious to match. The intelligence I can give a pass to. We can't know exactly how intelligent any dinosaurs were, and the book's idea that the velociraptors are smarter than any non-human animal currently alive today probably isn't accurate, but whatever, it's not too big a deal. The real issue I have is how vicious they are. To put it bluntly, these velociraptors don't act like any animal on Earth, but instead more like slasher movie villains. At one point, a group of them spent 20 minutes biting their way through metal bars just to try to get at the people inside, rather than turn away and look for easier prey elsewhere. They're presented as a pack-hunting animal that works in a group, yet towards the end of the book, when Alan Grant manages to kill one of the velociraptors by lethal injection administered via egg, another member of the pack instantly turns against her packmate, beginning to eat the other velociraptor before it has even died. The book's various problems with the dinosaurs, particularly with the changes it makes to have them be more monstrous, all compound into one big issue, but all in all, it's not that big. The book is pretty clear throughout that the animals in Jurassic Park aren't real dinosaurs, and that the non-dinosaur DNA used to patch them up might be affecting their abilities and behaviour. Sure, if you're someone who knows jack squat about dinosaurs going in, you'll probably come away with some misconceptions, but if you're inclined to do any of your own research or know a bit about dinosaurs already, it's not going to have any disastrous effects on your ideas about them. Let's just hope that the book hasn't already been picked up to be adapted into a movie before it's even officially released, and that the series of movies that result from that don't snowball into a T-Rex sized problem of inaccuracies that are ever building upon past inaccuracies. Oh, what's that? Steven Spielberg is interested in making a movie? Like I said at the beginning of this section, Jurassic Park is an enjoyable book, and the reviews and sales reflected that. It was received favourably by many publications and quickly became a bestseller. The success was easy to see coming, with 4 different film studios vying for adaptation rights for the film before the book had even released. Those rights ultimately went to Steven Spielberg, the inventor of the modern blockbuster and the most commercially successful director of all time. With that sort of pedigree behind it, is the movie good? You can bet Jurassic is.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
The movie was a smash hit. It grossed nearly $950 million in 1993, and until the release of Titanic 4 years later, it was the highest grossing movie ever made. Critics loved it, audiences loved it. Spielberg was completely vindicated in buying the rights before the book was released, based on the concept of, what if there was a Jurassic Park? The movie is a pretty decent adaptation of the book. There are the normal changes you would expect to see when going from a 460-page novel to a 2-hour movie. Scenes are cut, ideas aren't expanded upon quite as much, everything is just a little bit simpler. Everyone is made to be a little bit more morally good, except, of course, the lawyer character, who is made more weaselly than ever.
Of particular interest is the character of John Hammond.
Who is maybe the closest thing the book has to a villain. Most of the issues that arrive in the park that aren't just sheer dumb luck can, in some way, be traced back to Hammond's greed and incompetence, but in the film, he's given a much more positive spin. Another thing that needs to be taken in mind when going from page-turner to blockbuster is, of course, the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs in the book already served as the spice, and here, that spice is the main attraction. What that means is, where in the book there are lots of little problems with the dinosaurs being portrayed less as animals and more as monsters, that monstrous behaviour is heightened here, to help keep kids like this happy.
That doesn't look very scary. More like a 6-foot turkey.
Let's take a look at the big three monstrosified species from the book, in the same order we did back there. Dilophosaurus first. Its plot role doesn't change, early foreshadowing, Newman spitplay, but its design is very different. As described in the book, Dilophosaurus is pretty accurate to the 1990 idea of what one might have looked like, barring the venomous spit. Here in the movie, it's way smaller than it should be, and fitting for a movie 20% made up of iconic shots, has a very iconic neck frill, which, like the venomous spit, is completely fabricated. The reason for both the shrinking and the frill is pretty obvious, I think. Both make the dinosaur fit more easily into a fairly well-trodden monster trope, which TV Tropes calls the killer rabbit. At first, the Dilophosaurus is pretty cute. It's small and it makes an appealing hooting noise. It's a kawaii dinosaur and we're maybe supposed to be annoyed that Nedry is being kind of a dick towards it, or feel the tension waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it does. Once the spit is unleashed, the frill expands and the killer rabbit, the Dilophosaurus, now more intimidating, reveals its true monstrous nature. That its monstrous nature consists of two completely made up traits is beside the point of the scene. But it's not beside the point of this essay. What we're seeing here is a conscious move away from trying to accurately depict dinosaurs as animals towards treating them as plot device monsters. The T-Rex and the Velociraptor get less changes than the Dilos, but both are still further monstrosified. With the T-Rex, their ability to only see moving objects is no longer a consequence of the amphibian DNA grafted into them, but instead a natural weakness of T-Rex as a species, something Grant is telling people about before he even knows Jurassic Park exists. This change is subtle, but what it does is further bake the monster movie rules into the T-Rex as a creature. It also continues a further trend of the franchise as a whole, where wrong information is presented as fact. If you watch this movie, there's no reason to think the T-Rex eyesight thing is wrong. It's a piece of misinformation that very easily slips under the radar. All the changes to the Velociraptors are minor, but still present. Keep in mind, of course, that anytime we talk about Velociraptors in this movie, we're actually seeing Deinonychus. Take a look at this scene, where Grant learns that they're cloning Velociraptors for use in Jurassic Park, and the look of horror on his face. This guy's job is to study these animals, and he's terrified that they've been brought back. I guess they really must be dangerous, right?
We bred raptors.
They're also somehow made even more vicious. In the book, 8 adult raptors threaten the characters, but in the movie, only 3 are present. These 3 raptors manage to pose as much of a threat as more than double that number did in the book. The explanation for why there are less raptors also makes them much more vicious. The current alpha female velociraptor killed the missing 5 when she was introduced to the pack. Animal behaviour like that in the wild isn't unheard of course, but pay attention to why these changes were made and why all the changes we see to the velociraptors establish them as more vicious, volatile and dangerous. It's because we aren't being asked to view these creatures as dangerous animals, but as monsters. None of this is too egregious, but it's not only a step up from the book, but it's also in a medium that a lot more people will see it in. Suddenly, it's a lot easier to believe that people will be exposed to the version of dinosaurs as monsters presented in this movie, and not really think about it, but just internalize what they're seeing as the way dinosaurs were. Especially when we consider how much more accessible this movie is over the book, to one of Dinosaur's key fan demographics, children. With a movie as successful as Jurassic Park, of course, sequels were on the way, starting in 1997 with The Lost World. Before we get to the movie sequels though, I want to briefly touch on the 1995 Michael Crichton Jurassic Park sequel novel, The Lost World. I didn't read that book when writing this video, and I'm not going to talk about it that much, mainly because I think it's best viewed as more of an offshoot of the main cultural impact of the franchise. But I think it's worth mentioning that even in this relatively irrelevant cultural dead end, the exaggeration of dinosaurs continues, and continues in the most ridiculous way we've seen in this series so far. Crichton's The Lost World introduces Jurassic Park Site B on the island of Isla Sorna. In the book, InGen had cloned more species at Site B, including the Carnotaurus. Taking a page out of his own book from 5 years ago, Crichton just makes up a superpower for this animal to have. In this case, near-perfect chameleon-like colour-changing camouflage, which allows them to mimic patterns and even shadows. Sure, man, whatever. As long as it stays in the culturally doomed timeline of the book canon,
It's poisoning as few minds as possible.
fair warning, after Crichton's The Lost World, which I haven't read and thus can't comment on the quality of, everything in this series goes downhill. Don't take my word for it, here's what famous chaos theorist Ian Malcolm had to say after seeing it.
That is one big pile of shit.
I could sit here and dissect every one of these movies for the next 10 hours, but A, I don't want to do that, and B, the idea of thinking about any of these movies for as long as that would take makes my brain hurt. From this point on in the video, just assume that every movie features at least one plot point that makes no sense or contradicts something previously established in the franchise, and that way I can just focus on how they misrepresent the dinosaurs and save us both a headache. 97's The Lost World and 2001's Jurassic Park 3 don't have anything too bad. Of the monstrous three we've looked at so far, Dilophosaurs sit both these entries out, and while both T-Rex and the Velociraptors continue the trend of acting like vicious monsters rather than animals, there's nothing that stands out more than anything we've already discussed. The worst you can say is that they enforce the previous movie's cultural misconceptions about these species without actually creating any of their own. I'll be honest, the Lost World movie isn't even that bad. Its script is weak, as are most of its characters, but there was still enough cool shots from Spielberg in places for me to get some enjoyment out of it. Jurassic Park 3 really does stink though. With Spielberg gone from the director's chair, we bring in Joe Johnston, who does a great job directing the movie while putting as little authorial voice on it as possible, if that's a compliment. The movie also adds some new dinosaurs to the Isla Sorna site, who I guess InGen had cloned and raised to adulthood but just decided not to put in Jurassic Park. Spinosaurus is the big one. She replaces the T-Rex in the movie's logo, and in fact, the T-Rex only has a brief cameo in this one. A cameo where the Spinosaurus, I think, kills it? There's a lot of issues with how Spinosaurus looks in this movie, but I'm not going to get too into it for the same reason I'm not complaining about the lack of feathers on the Velociraptors. At the time the movie was made, these reconstructions were basically accurate, and I'm not going to complain that people weren't able to predict the future. Instead, I'll complain about the pterosaurs. The pterosaurs are a good example to talk about how these movies are slowly, almost imperceptibly, divorcing Mesozoic creatures from reality. In the first book, there's a scene where Grant and the two kids are attacked by pterosaurs, and one of them tries to lift up Lex in its talons. In the book, Lex is an 8-year-old girl, but even still, the pterosaur can't lift her. Flying animals need to be very light to achieve liftoff, so it makes sense that with the added weight of a person, even a small one, that's no longer a possibility for them. Not so in Jurassic Park 3. They are lifting people around willy-nilly here, defying physics in the name of being a better movie monster. The loosening of reality when it comes to dinosaurs and pterosaurs continues with the question of their survival on Isla Sorna for all this time anyway. In Crichton's book, an important plot point is that there isn't enough food on Isla Nublar to support the animal population on its own, so InGen has to spend a lot of money buying extra food and transporting it to the island. In The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 though, Isla Sorna hosts a thriving population with no food brought in, a population that, even 8 years on in Jurassic Park 3, seems to show no sign of food shortage, still covered in vegetation, herbivores and predators. In the plot of Jurassic Park 3, Grant is kidnapped by William H. Macy to look for his kid who went missing on Isla Sorna 8 weeks ago in a jet ski hang glider accident. When Grant finally meets the kid, he asks him how he survived on the island alone all this time, but the answer is obvious. If the animal population is anything to judge by, life on Isla Sorna isn't constrained by such pedestrian rules as needing a food supply. Now is as good a time as any to talk about the roaring. The animals in the Jurassic Park movies, especially the T-Rex, roar a lot. The T-Rex's favourite thing, aside from terrorising people while also being presented in a vaguely heroic light, is to roar. Has anyone ever heard a bird roar? If not a bird, maybe another archosaur? the broader group dinosaurs belong to? Any roaring crocodiles? Anyone? It's unlikely we'll ever know exactly what T-Rex sounded like, of course, but the current scientific consensus is pretty clear. T-Rex, or any dinosaur, probably didn't roar.
Of course, a lot of the papers and evidence against roaring T-Rex do postdate the original Jurassic Park trilogy.
The franchise goes extinct in 2001 following Jurassic Park 3, but paleontology marches on. I'm not exactly sure why the series dies here. Sure, the movies were getting worse and worse, but at the same time, it's not like they weren't succeeding financially. The Lost World opened to the biggest opening weekend box office of any movie in history at the time of release, and Jurassic Park 3 made nearly $370 million off of a budget of $93 million, and was the 8th highest grossing movie of 2001. Whatever killed the franchise here, I'm glad, because I already have a lot to talk about in this essay, and that's with the 14-year gap in production. As the 21st century began, Jurassic Park was extinct. Discoveries about dinosaurs' lack of ability to roar weren't the only paleontological advances in that 14-year interim, or even the biggest. On its way was the biggest paradigm shift in how we view dinosaurs since the dinosaur renaissance of the late 60s, and a change that guaranteed that annoying nerds on the internet would complain that science had ruined dinosaurs for the rest of time. We already knew some dinosaurs had feathers. It was already scientific consensus that birds were dinosaurs. The fossil species Archaeopteryx from the Jurassic era was also known since the 1861 discovery of a fossil in Germany, and it was clearly feathered too. But Archaeopteryx was historically seen as an exception, the missing link between non-avian dinosaurs and their feathered modern-day counterparts. As the late 90s and noughties rolled on, more and more discoveries came in that supported the idea that among the theropods, a group which includes modern day birds and Archaeopteryx, but also dinosaurs more traditionally thought of as scaly or leathery, like our old friends Dilophosaurus, T-Rex and the Velociraptor, feathers may have been much more widespread. Not every theropod likely had a full coat of feathers, but as the fossil evidence and analysis continued to come in, a truth became clear. A lot of theropod dinosaurs, particularly dromaeosaurs like Velociraptor and Deinonychus, were dripped up. Outside of the world of paleontology, foul necromancies were brewing. Like the fictional InGen, in the real world an evil megacorp was also planning to bring something once thought long dead back to life. In 2015, the results of these dark genetic magics were ready to be shown to the world. Folks, it pains me to say it.
Welcome to Jurassic World.
Heads up for this section, we're going to be looking at the films a bit less granularly from here on out. I know I've already said I think everything after The Lost World sucks, but the World trilogy really blows, and I want to spend as little time thinking and talking about them as possible. The plots of these movies are like the Pope, incredibly holy and generally full of shit. I won't be covering every example of bad representation here, but I think it's fair to say that basically every dinosaur in these movies is, in either behaviour, appearance, or both, not portrayed as something resembling an animal that might have once walked the earth. Here's a short example. There's this tiny scene in Jurassic World where the two kids whose names I don't care enough about to look up are at a little dinosaur petting farm where there are baby sauropods fitted out with saddles that kids can ride around in. Unless these animals are swimming up to their necks in sedative, this probably isn't very realistic behaviour. Even animals that we have domesticated and bred to be ridden, like horses, probably wouldn't let a bunch of kids ride around on them like this without kicking up a bit of a fuss, especially not if they were foals. This scene lasts like a minute, but it's a good reminder that no matter the screen time, no dinosaurs in this trilogy are treated like animals. They're all just props. As a brief warning of what's to come, here's a quote from Colin Trevorrow, the guy who wrote all three of these movies and directed both Jurassic World and Dominion, that I think sums up why his ideas about dinosaurs are at odds with portraying them as anything other than monsters. When promoting Dominion, he had this to say: Jurassic World Dominion asks a single question. If dinosaurs lived amongst us, would you be safe? And the answer is no. Ignoring how dumb this question is on principle, given that dinosaurs do live among us, and how bad of a writer it makes Trevorrow out to be, given that this isn't even a question addressed by the movie, it also outlines his position on dinosaurs. They aren't normal animals, they are dangerous killer beasts. Before we really get into things though, I want to address the Indominus Rex and the Indoraptor, to say that honestly I don't have that much of a problem with either. I have problems with both relating to how they play into the narratives of the respective films, but I really have to narrow the scope of this segment to just the dinosaur representations, because if I stop to point out every piece of bad writing in these movies, this video would balloon into an unwieldy size faster than Colin Trevorrow writes an uninteresting girl boss character. Just to allow myself a brief sidebar, can you believe that the CinemaSins video for Fallen Kingdom is under 20 minutes? It says a lot about how much CinemaSins sucks that even handed a golden goose like Fallen Kingdom, they still can't turn out a good video. Just focusing on Indominus Rex and the Indoraptors as representations of dinosaurs as animals, I have no issues. Not that either of them ever acts like an animal, but that there's no expectation from me that they should. They're fake animals made up for military purposes, and the movie clearly stresses that for both of them many times. They even found a way to reincorporate the chameleon powers of Carnotaurus from the Lost World book, and did it in a way that is less scientifically inaccurate than its original appearance.
I don't think the actions of either of these two species
They're colouring people's perceptions of what actual dinosaurs were like, so Trevorrow gets a pass here. Let me assure you, this is the last pass I will be giving him. Moving away from the Indo duo, let's talk about the trilogy's obsession with dinosaurs as war animals more broadly. In Fallen Kingdom, the bad guy gives loads of examples of previous uses animals have had in war scenarios.
We've been using animals in combat for centuries. Horses, elephants. The Soviets used disease-bearing rats against the Germans at Stalingrad.
Here's what he fails to mention. All these examples are historical. The reason he doesn't have any modern examples is because no one uses animals in war anymore to any large extent. Occasionally, animals will get a look in to help with bomb squads, but they're never used as weapons in modern times, which is what the dinosaurs in these movies are being sold as. The movies even make it pretty clear why. Let's look at how the Indoraptor and later the Atrociraptors in Dominion are instructed on who their targets are. A soldier points an object at the target they want the raptor to attack, and then pulls a trigger to let the dinosaur know to attack the target. Everyone with a brain already sees the issue here, which is that it makes way more sense to just use a gun in this scenario. The only reason you might use something other than a gun here is if it was nigh invincible, had infinite stamina, and could burst through walls, which obviously no real animal can do. Lucky for the inhabitants of Jurassic World, then, that dinosaurs there can do exactly that. Or unlucky, I guess. Raptors get thrown around like nothing and get back up without a care in the world. The writers of these movies seem unaware that these animals had mostly hollow bones. In Dominion, during the Atrociraptor chase scene, they shrug off multiple direct collisions with cars. Obviously, an important part of the InGen cloning method involves the addition of an adamantium skeleton. The Atrociraptor chase scene is really the most atrocious example here. Two of the raptors keep up with moving cars and motorcycles for minutes at a time, showing no sign of getting tired or losing interest in their quarry. Remember in Jurassic Park when the T-Rex chases them in the Jeep, and after about 30 seconds it loses any interest and just kind of wanders off once it realizes it's never going to catch up to them? You could argue the Atrociraptors never give up because of their training. Don't worry, I'll talk about Owen Grady and his incredible breakthroughs in animal training in a little bit, but even if they're the most loyally trained animals in history, you would still expect them to get tired at some point. The reason for all these heightened traits is because the dinosaurs in these films are basically superheroes. Take a look at this scene from the end of Jurassic World. Divorced from all context, it's actually kind of a sick scene, but the dinosaurs in it don't act like animals, they act like the Avengers. We later learn in Fallen Kingdom that when the Mosasaurus jumps out here to attack the Indominus Rex, it wasn't even interested in eating it, it seemingly just knew it had a chance for a heroic moment and took its shot. The I-Rex's skeleton is still sitting on the ocean floor 3 years later, untouched by any sort of digestive processes. The superpowers extend further than this, too. After Jurassic World shuts down in 2015, it's still home to a very healthy dinosaur population 3 years later, just like Isla Sorna before it. Where are any of these things getting food from? The Baryonyx in Fallen Kingdom tanks lava to the face with seemingly no injuries multiple times and has no fear of the molten rock whatsoever. Seriously, Doctor Strange couldn't have whipped up a portal to grab this guy? Owen Grady time. The Chris Pratt himself has discovered a way of training dinosaurs that beats any training method for any animal we've ever seen in the world of non-fiction. As a rule of thumb, animals are pretty difficult to train, especially non-domesticated wild animals. Sure, you can teach a dog to do something on your command pretty quickly, but wild animals? Zoos often spend months teaching animals relatively simple commands, such as to go towards a signal once prompted, and once that training is complete, it generally needs frequent reinforcement. In these movies, Owen Grady holds out his hand, presses his little clicker, and his raptors enter a telepathic trance state where they obey his every spoken command. In Fallen Kingdom, after 3 years of absolutely no training reinforcement, Blue is able to instantly respond to Owen as soon as he sticks out his hand into that dumb gesture. In Dominion, Beta, Blue's daughter, a dinosaur that has had seemingly very little training, doesn't respond to Owen's hand alone, but once Alan Grant and the clone girl, there's a clone girl, join in, the telepathic power is tripled and the beast finally obeys. Continuing the trend of being organisms one step removed from the material plane, dinosaurs in these films also have no effect on the ecosystem around them. At the end of Fallen Kingdom, a handful of dinosaurs are released from this mansion somewhere in North America. By the time of Dominion, 4 years later, they've managed to spread all around the world, are doing completely fine numbers wise, and are somehow causing no ecological issues despite being large invasive species that would have a massive effect on any food chain. Seriously, we know these animals must be having no effect on the food chains they've barged their way into, because otherwise the characters would talk about it. The A-plot of Dominion is bizarrely about locusts and the ecological destruction they're causing, and yet no one ever mentions a single issue arising from a global invasive dinosaur problem. Dinosaurs are in the wild, living in all these different habitats, and not only do they have no impact on these habitats, but these habitats also have no impact on them. Velociraptors don't have feathers in these movies. When they made Jurassic Park in '93, we didn't know Deinonychus had feathers, so the movie Velociraptors, which are, as a reminder, based on Deinonychus, don't have them. In 2015, when Jurassic World came out, we knew Deinonychus probably had feathers, but Blue and her squad are just as naked as ever. They could have tried to handwave this as feathers just not being a thing most dinosaurs have in the Jurassic universe, but no, it's stated that the reason they lack them is because of the gap-filling process which was used to complete the dino DNA. Indeed, we even see a properly feathered dromaeosaur in Dominion, the Pyroraptor, and it looks pretty good. They subsequently have it swim and hold its breath perfectly capably through ice-cold water, so if anything I'm subtracting points for it, but still the feathers are nice. So Blue and the other raptors should have feathers, but don't. Okay, here's a question then. If Blue and Beta are meant to have feathers, how on earth are they able to survive in the cold, snowy conditions we see them living in Dominion? Warm-blooded or not, going out naked in that kind of weather, especially for a baby, is just going to lead to death by hypothermia. The reason they survive is the same reason dinosaurs have no impact on the food chains they've been added to, because at no point in the scripting phase did anyone think of these creatures as if they were real animals interacting with the world around them. Look, I could go on and on. I could bring up this Reddit post and talk about how, in many cases, the dinosaur recreations in the World trilogy are actually less accurate to what we know than those in the Park trilogy. I could talk about the pterosaurs in Jurassic World and whatever the fuck is going on with some of them having T-Rex heads. I could complain about the cave-dwelling Dimetrodons in Jurassic World Dominion. What are they even doing here? I could talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but I'm tired.
If you haven't got what I'm trying to get across yet, I'm not going to convince you at this stage.
There's no effort to portray animals here. We're either being shown spectacle, we're being shown monsters, or we're being shown both. Animals have nothing to do with it.
When I was maybe 7 years old, during a family summer holiday, we visited an amusement park where they had a dinosaur carousel. I remember getting in an argument with the attendant operating the ride. When I asked him questions about it and which species of dinosaur were on the carousel, he told me I was wrong. Those things weren't dinosaurs, they were monsters. I knew he was wrong, but what could I do? I was 7 and not properly able to articulate what I was talking about, and he was probably an underpaid teenager who wasn't being paid enough to argue with an annoying kid about taxonomic definitions. But it stuck with me, obviously. I don't think I'd be the type of person who makes this video, who hates what this franchise does to the public perception of dinosaurs so much, if it hadn't. Movies are unrealistic all the time. To a certain extent, I'd look back at most of this video and I cringe a little bit. Oh, they made the genetically engineered reanimated dinosaurs too unrealistic in this sci-fi franchise. Big deal. Except, kids love dinosaurs. The 7-year-old in that amusement park loved them, and every day in my current job where I teach kids about animals, there's always a couple who I can tell love them as much as I did, and do. And every time they mention them, they always talk about Jurassic World. Something about the Mosasaurus in particular, it's always getting brought up. It can't be denied that something causes all these kids to have dinosaurs on the brain. And I just think it sucks that for a lot of kids, this is what they get. They don't get cool animals that look and behave like we think these creatures once might have. They get monsters and spectacle. The Jurassic Park franchise isn't the only place people can learn about dinosaurs, of course. Just recently, Prehistoric Planet was released on Apple TV, a David Attenborough narrated wildlife documentary series that tries to use modern computer-generated graphics to depict what life might have been like in the Mesozoic. That series isn't scientifically perfect either, but you can tell it's trying, that it wants to get across what these animals would have been like as animals. If you haven't seen it yet and like dinosaurs, I'd really recommend it. The week it was released, Prehistoric Planet was the 5th most streamed TV show. Jurassic World Dominion, which came out only 2 weeks later, had an opening weekend earning of $145 million US. It's impossible for any other dinosaur media to eclipse the huge space in our collective culture that the Jurassic Park franchise has, and as long as that's the case, the portrayal of dinosaurs, I fear, will only keep getting worse and worse like it's done so far, with every subsequent entry building on shakier and shakier foundations. In Jurassic World Dominion, in the final climactic scene where Giganotosaurus is bearing down on the protagonists, T-Rex bursts in, of course, and, completely ignoring the humans, as usual, gets her hero moment where she saves the day, like she does in every Jurassic World movie. During the fight, there's a fake out, where for a second it looks like Giganotosaurus has won, and T-Rex is dead. It stretches on for only a second, but it was just long enough for me to hope that maybe it would stick. Maybe the T-Rex would die and take Jurassic Park with it. Of course, life found a way. Thanks for watching. I plan to make more videos, so please subscribe if you like this and want to see what direction I'll take things in the future. Comment your favourite strange dinosaur inaccuracy in the Jurassic Park franchise in the comments below. If you're Colin Trevorrow and watching this and want to get back at me for continuously stressing how dog shit your movies are, feel free to email me and I'll happily appear in your next movie as undeserving character who dies in a horrific death scene that's out of step with the tone of the rest of the movie. I've seen Jurassic World, so I know you like doing that to Irish actors, and I've seen Caleb Heron in Dominion, so I know you aren't averse to casting random internet people in your movies. My people are waiting for your call.